Welcome to the Animation Career Community Podcast, where we answer your questions on how to grow, maintain, and transform your animation career at every stage. I'm your co-host, John.
And I'm your co-host, Kathy.
Today, we're talking with Perry Shulak of Critical Fusion and the animation industry in Edmonton, Canada. Get ready, it's going to be a good one. So welcome to the podcast, Perry. It's very nice to have you here.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
So we're quite excited to talk to you today. Obviously, your studio, Critical Fusion, you do a lot of interesting things, a lot of different types of media. And geographically, you're located in Edmonton, Canada, which I think is very important for our audience to hear about, because it's not often we talk about that area of Canada, especially when it comes to the animation industry. Now, Perry, we originally met quite a few years ago at the Ottawa International Animation Festival during the TAC conference. So for anyone that doesn't know, during the Ottawa Animation Festival, there's kind of a more business side to it for the first 3 days, kind of alongside the actual festival, where producers, broadcasters, professionals, studio owners kind of get together and have a chit chat about the industry, and there are talks, panels, etc. Now, if I recall, we met at one of the conference festival events, and was that, I think it was the cocktail hour, right? I think everyone was kind of gathered in the lobby, and we were all mingling, probably trying to network with everybody, because I think networking is important to our audience, right? Especially in times like this. So if I recall correctly, that was the case, right?
Yes, definitely. And coming from Edmonton, it's necessary to get out and abroad and connect to people in other markets. And you were grateful to welcome me to the event and provide me a lot of information to understand, because it's the type of knowledge we just don't get much locally out of this particular city.
Right. And that was your first time in Ottawa doing that event, correct?
Yes, that was the first time. It was quite a while ago, almost over 10 years ago. And over that time, I've been to that event 4 times.
Right. Yeah. And what was your kind of your feeling about it coming, into it for the first time?
I think at first it was a little bit overwhelming, because the one thing we don't have in Edmonton is a dramatic animation industry. It's barely visible at all. So when you come into a market and into kind of an event where there's a lot of talent, that it sort of takes you a little bit offhand, because but also it's welcoming, and it's very what the term I can use is inspirational.
Right.
I think that's the key in coming from any kind of outside market that's not in mainstream, is you need kind of threads to connect you to the larger market, because then you don't really understand what it's all about and what the potential is.
Yeah. I find the same thing. Like when I go to any of the festivals or conferences, I get energized from being around a lot of people in the same industry, with obviously the same interest in doing something for the industry. And kind of on that line, Perry, how did you actually become interested in animation? Like, what was your background maybe as a kid? Like, how did you just watch cartoons like probably most of us did?
I had sort of a roundabout kind of approach to the actual industry. I started drawing when I was 6, and my grandparents gave me these big giant tabloid how to do animation books.
No, okay.
That sort of got me launched. And so, as far as the technical process or having the tools to do it, at that time didn't necessarily have that, but it allowed me the opportunity to kind of practice my drawing skills in a format that was a little bit different.
Right.
And it provided enough foundational theory at that age, when you're 6, to sort of, hey, this is pretty kind of cool stuff.
Wow.
And so that sort of ignited the whole desire to continue to develop my drawing skills through kind of the early years, and through high school and up to education.
Right.
But then once I hit education, there wasn't really much of a kind of a visual industry in Edmonton. So I ended up going into the Faculty of Science, and I spent 2 years in that particular faculty. But in my second year, I took a kind of a preliminary program for visual communications and design and arts.
Okay.
At that time, the program was still connected, the design program was still connected to the fine arts industry. And so we spent a lot of that time was doing life drawings, developing our life drawing skills, doing life drawing. And so that really gave me a sort of a heads up and kind of allowed me to kind of further push my drawing skills and develop them. And I managed to nail that course, so much so that it allowed me to transfer from the sciences into the Faculty of Fine Arts and the design program. And since the design program was back then still part of the fine arts program, the kind of life drawing and developing those drawing skills continued.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. Like I find, first of all, like when you were talking about your parents giving you those tabloid books, it makes me think of the Preston Blair kind of how to draw for animation type, tabloid books. Those were those big, gigantic formats, and he gave you all the kind of the basics and fundamentals of drawing, animating, silhouette drawing, things that a lot of our audience obviously would be familiar with. And it seems like your parents were quite encouraging of this direction for you, which is quite amazing too.
Yeah, my mother had a kind of a knack for a creative knack, and has always been. She was involved in sculpting, and she would sculpt these Elvis Presley heads.
Okay.
So it sort of was something that was always around, and part of our environment.
Wow, amazing. So let's talk about your company, Critical Fusion. Maybe you can just tell us what your studio is all about for an audience that doesn't know your studio and the work that you do.
Well, I guess I'm technically the studio. I have expanded and shrank depending on the need of actual projects.
Sure.
And this allowed me to be a little bit more flexible in my practice. So I sort of operate like, initially I was more involved in the kind of interactive side of things, developing a lot of interactive content. I guess into getting into that, I ended up working like career-wise 2 years for Access Television in their kind of creative department. And that's where I sort of first initially got the opportunity to actually do animation production.
Okay.
So we were using way back then when Access existed, the 3D tools were somewhat limited. I was using Infinity D and Strata Studio Pro and trying to figure out how to render across this kind of little first set up internal network of computers, which were really kind of limited. And so I had to kind of deal with what you call the dropout of frames and all those issues in those early phases. But it was that opportunity to kind of work with the tools and develop the initial skill sets in the 3D format.
And what was the industry like at that stage? Has it changed a lot since then, or is it still relatively small?
Yeah, since then, the industry hasn't shifted. Actually, since what happened with Access Television is it was originally a government-owned or kind of supported organization, and then it was sold off to Moses Zanier for $1. And then as Moses Zanier continued to run it while he was receiving additional support from funds from the Alberta government. But once that ended, then the whole channel just got cut and it was just kind of spliced to the side and disappeared. So there's not really any or not a sizable level of kind of much of a broadcast industry in Edmonton.
Right.
So that's sort of part of the funnel that led to, I would say, a much more smaller, less robust market.
And so is your clientele tends to be outside of Edmonton?
My clientele, like since I'm fairly diverse, I do a fair lot of design work, but a lot of content that's developed, I apply to the Alberta Media Fund. And they provide me what you call initial support funds to get my concepts and ideas out there. And that's sort of the what I've done with the kind of the very first dome show I developed, which was Legends of Northern Skies. I sort of developed a concept, and at first, in kind of applying for that fund, they didn't really understand what I was trying to achieve, and we weren't necessarily successful on the first run. But on the second year, we sort of I landed the funding, and so that allowed me to kind of develop all the initial phase content, develop a script and a story, and some kind of initial branding for that particular production.
Right.
So that allowed me to kind of step forward. Then what I did is I took that package and presented it to the TELUS World of Science Edmonton and said, here's something, maybe you would like to do this. And that's when it all started to take off.
So is that, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that. Is that then the genesis of your company, Critical Fusion?
Well, yeah, sort of. It's sort of kind of a lead-in. Like for years and years and years, I spent a lot of time developing interactive educational resources. A lot of them were for K-12, for kids-based content. And a lot of it was very heavy visual oriented. And we did kind of integrate some of the 3D stuff into those applications. And we kind of also introduced a fair amount of animation-based work on a more modular level.
Right.
And so as I kind of progressed through that, the market kept on changing and shifting, and to ensure that I can remain viable, I just kind of shift along with it. And then it wasn't until I sort of hooked up with the TELUS World of Science that all of a sudden this sort of whole new initiative or kind of market opened up for me, which was these dome shows.
Right. Yeah. I want to get into the dome shows in just a quick moment, but I just wanted to also mention your company. You also do websites, you do graphic design. So you've got kind of like a broad set of skills that allows your company to kind of obviously stay afloat during times like this, because there are tons of other animation companies that are very specific to animation that tend to struggle as well.
Yeah, in Edmonton, you have to be a little more diverse and variable. And it's a lot of those other projects that sort of pay the bills that allow me to kind of remain in the hunt for developing more animation related content. And if you didn't have that diversity, you would be kind of stuck, because then there's just too great a gap between projects to kind of cover off all your costs. And then also, in addition, some of these projects that come along in the design realm, like I just wrapped up a animated explainer video for the city of Edmonton. It allows me to kind of engage and bring another person, another animator on the project, give her a little bit of opportunity to kind of do some work and create some cash flow. And it allows me to kind of build up my portfolio a little bit more. And also, again, it all provides that bridge that allows me to get to the next production.
Yeah, I was curious about what your structure looks like on average. Like, is it you mostly, and you're hiring out freelancers? Do you have specific people you bring in regularly?
Well, for a while, like when I was doing interactive stuff, I did have a team, I did have staff, and I built up to about 8 or 11 staff. But when I get into a kind of a secondary mode, when I start like more currently, there was a point once I started getting into the dome stuff, there was a desire to spend more time script writing and start to kind of compose these things from top to bottom. And so now that I'm in that sort of mode, when I'm sort of writing and scripting, I don't want to have to worry about trying to keep staff busy.
Right.
So that allows me a little more flexibility, that I can kind of focus specifically on those projects and put the effort in as both a writer and a visual creator to ensure that I can develop enough composite of content that when I actually do go for financing, that it has much greater chance of landing it.
Amazing. Yeah. I think that's, it's very, it's very telling of most studios when you hear the owner speak of bringing in crew, bringing in people, giving, especially younger artists a chance to develop their skills. But at the same time get them engaged in the work in the industry. I mean, it's better when you're a company, obviously, right? Like you're building up your own company's portfolio, but giving these people an opportunity, whether it's a small project or a larger project, which, I have a little bit of experience with too. Like my company does the same thing. Where on occasions when I have a project that is obviously out of my own scope to do all by myself, which happens more often than not. You bring in 5, 6, sometimes 10 people to help get that work done, but get it to the quality, as you say, right? Ultimately, you want these projects to get off the ground, because if you're working on development funding, there's no guarantee it'll get off the ground unless your presentation of that project is top notch, and you can then get the Alberta Media Fund or any other funding organization to open up the wallets even more.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is like how similar that is to big studios as well. That they're dealing with on a different scale, but they're dealing with the same issues of like, we need to get the next project. Who can we keep on? It seems to be a similar like obviously different to a certain degree, but it's still the same concept. Get the next project, crew up, decrew. Where can you got some extra funds for? So it's interesting that even the small and big studios are struggling with the same problems.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is just kind of where the investments come from as well. And in this day and age, what the industry is experiencing right now is just, kind of a lack of funding across the board.
Yeah, I know when you're dealing with that, especially when you're dealing with kind of like a city of like Edmonton, when the kind of the rest of the market, there seems to be kind of this shift. You'll see a lot of producers appear, like in Edmonton, that will have these kind of animation initiatives where they kind of key in, and all of a sudden, when the market drops out, those kind of producers kind of drop off, mostly because they themselves have no capacity to develop the content or the visuals.
Right.
And in most cases, it's not a cost that they can necessarily absorb. And I guess that's what makes me a little bit unique, is that I come at it not only as a producer, but also as kind of a creative writer and animator. So I can sort of take whatever funds that the Alberta Media provides me initially and bring it to a point where it has viability. And also, what's also unique that's different than, say, broadcast, the dome shows are not directly connected to any one distribution structure. So and it has a revenue model built into it. So when I'm sort of chasing after those funds, for example, the next project I'm working on, which is the Impossible Journey, I can approach the CMF and have a viable kind of track record and a revenue model that works. That's a commercial revenue model. I'm not waiting on a broadcaster to give me a little letter of agreement to say that, yeah, they'll take it. I have kind of a purposeful kind of approach and route where any investment will have guaranteed payback.
And can you talk about the dome shows? You've mentioned it a couple times. Just explain what that looks like.
Dome format is completely different than traditional kind of film. It has a whole different. Imagine when you're developing traditional kind of production, it runs in a square box. Whereas in dome, you sort of have to think about the whole world. It's almost like a immersive theatrical experience, where kind of movement and flow becomes more part of the process, and trying to keep your audience engaged. And also, it gives you opportunities kind of to play with a much greater space. You sort of have to almost imagine your audience inside of one of those little snow globes that you shake, and then all the snow kind of goes all over the place. You're in it and involved in it. So it has a lot more, I would say, a lot more emotional impact on the audience, because it's overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. And so when you present and build, you have to be a little bit aware of that. And there's also the possibility, if there's too much movement and spinning, your audience can start throwing up.
So it's is it? I'm picturing like you're sitting in an auditorium, and it's a round dome around the audience, and how is it projected? onto this dome?
They have this approach, like there's this whole developed structure, standardized structure that's been developed over the last many years, where they develop these we call dome masters. And so the actual dome, depending on the actual technology that goes into the dome, uses a series of projectors that then are blended. And so,
Oh, okay.
so in Edmonton, just recently, or not long ago, when I did my dome show, they introduced a whole new, built a new system and rebuilt the dome. And so now it kind of projects at a 10K resolution. So it's fairly high res. Whereas you are getting new technology, like the dome in Vancouver is all LED, but not everybody can afford to build a $2 billion dome.
Yeah, for sure. This makes me think of, so I worked on a project that was not a dome, it was like a indoor space that, and it was projected on all walls, and there was some interactivity with the audience, but the audience is moving around in the space. But what you're saying about like fast motion, where you're drawing the eye of the audience is really different for such a large exposure. Your brain inputs that information differently. So as the artist, you have to change your style of motion, I would imagine.
Yeah, you have to think about the kind of movement of flow around the environment, and also how to attract the audience's eye, because there's certain kind of approaches that you can use to sort of ensure that your audience is looking in the right direction. Because a lot of it is about, like, I sort of look at the dome as kind of three different sort of patterns, where you had kind of idealized movement that attracts the audience eye, that's part of what encapsulates the story. Where is the story? And you want to take them to that point. And then you have what you call the kind of global exposure, or it's more of like a focused awareness of the actual dome structure, right? And so you can create visuals that kind of roll around the dome and embrace that format. But then you also have kind of the virtual space, where you can now build what you call expansive spaces that people can actually travel and move through. And that's really kind of neat, when you can kind of create kind of simulated environment where you're moving from destination to destination, almost as if you're in the real world.
That's cool. And does it tend to be educational formats that they're looking for?
Yeah, it's not always all cases. Like most cases, when a planetarium is looking to kind of license a show, they want science-based content. That's their mandate. But alternately, we're seeing a kind of a growing need for a kind of a demand for shows that are more experiential and are a little more diverse. But those shows are usually ticketed, and also a company will license or rent the dome, and then they will kind of handle and manage the actual kind of ticketing from afar.
I see. And if somebody's renting the dome, like a company, are they utilizing you directly through the domes? Like with I'm not sure, the planetarium or whoever owns the space, are they reaching out to you to build contents?
Not directly. I build all my own content. A lot of these things are kind of siloed. Like the one production that's been running both in Edmonton and Calgary, and is in about 10 other locations in the States, is titled Beautifica. And I can't say it's a visually interesting production, but not necessarily educational. It's one of those things where it's kind of a hit and miss depending on who your audience is. But what they do is they will rent directly from the TELUS World of Science the facility, and then they have specific set rates, and get a return on investment from that approach.
I see.
I was wondering, what does your crew look like when you're doing one of these dome animations? Like, is it a fairly largish crew? Like, I guess, depending on the amount of work and obviously your budget and everything.
Well, most dome shows, on average, there's two different types of shows that usually out there. You get the ones that are licensed by planetariums. They run them and cycle them through the day, and those shows run from 21 to 26 minutes. And so for me, I usually pull together a small team of about 3 or 4 people and then spend a year developing the actual show.
Okay.
On a larger scale, I haven't got to that larger scale yet because that's still kind of a elusive market.
Right.
Domes are still sort of deemed as experimental to some extent, and there's not a lot of developers in Canada that develop that sort of content. We have some people in Montreal, but as far as Western Canada, I believe I'm the only person out here who's developing dome shows out in Western Canada.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
what kind of softwares are you guys using?
I work with Cinema 4D as kind of standard platform, mostly because it's unlike other 3D packages, it's more a design-oriented package for motion graphics and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But it also has built in a kind of a dome camera that allows you to capture your kind of surrounding environment, render it out, and then it gets composited into After Effects.
Wow.
Gotcha.
How like let's say just kind of an overall broad number. How long does it take you to produce one of these dome animations? So from start to finish, let's say.
Usually the way it works is always a setup. Obviously, I go through the initial phase research, and that's usually almost a year ahead of times because I have to go through the process of submitting for funding and whatever else. So that's kind of initial phase from concept to landing the initial phase funding to write the script. Then in the script writing mode, it usually takes about 3 or 4 months to kind of build that out because also in that process, I also build out a demo, about a 3 or 4 minute demo.
Okay.
And then once we go into production, usually what I'll do is I'll storyboard it out first before I bring my team in. That way I'm fully prepared when we go into the actual production. And then once my team gets hooked up, then it takes about a year to build the show. It's usually kind of tightly managed, and so there's a process involved. And then once most of the animation is complete, it's about 4 months to render out.
Oh wow, that's crazy. So, but it does sound like a big chunk of this process is you're on your own developing and writing this stuff. That's an intense part to do by yourself without input. Do you have processes built into that for yourself to like get input from people? Do you get feedback from certain people in that process?
Yeah, usually I work with the TELUS World. Have been working with the TELUS World of Science on the previous project. They were involved in the script writing process and were providing me feedback to kind of tighten it up and get it to a point where the script's kind of solid and foundational. The one challenge in that I find is that they themselves didn't really have any experience developing dome shows either. So
right.
It was a whole learning research process to figure this out. And not only that, is that while we were building the show, they were renovating their dome, and so that wasn't even accessible.
Oh wow!
Jeez.
So we were a little bit in the dark, but beforehand, I traveled out to multiple conferences. They have immersive media conferences in and around the world. So I went to ones in Colorado and in Columbus, and that's where I developed enough kind of understanding of how to kind of approach script writing and visualization because after watching about 100 of these dome shows, you get a better idea of best practices, and that's key to understanding what the market is, what the demand is, and how to properly package these things to ensure that they're marketable.
How big are these conferences? Like, how big is outside of Canada? How big is this industry?
Canada is small. Europe is big. It's a far bigger industry abroad in Europe and in the Asian continent and in the U.S. In the U.S., they have about 300 domes. Japan has about 300 or 400, and there are about 600 domes in China.
Wow!
Oh wow!
And so it's a lot greater and much more wider market abroad than what we have available here in Canada.
does it tend to be animation based for these domes as well?
There is the Legends. We did use some 360 video in it. We shot full 360 video for a segment, but in most cases, when you're shooting 360, your camera has limited movability and is kind of stagnant. Whereas in 3D, it gives you an opportunity to kind of move around like a flow. It gives you a lot more flexibility in environment and space, so it makes the experience that much more dynamic.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's
And I
really
think,
cool.
I mean, in terms, actually, here's a quick question for you. Is the international global market something you're going after actively with
Yes,
these dome animations?
my first show, Legends, we last year sold license into China, which is, I can't say
Wow,
too many
congrats.
shows have done that. We have sold about 10 licenses in around North America. We converted it also to French language, so it's also a Mandarin language for the Chinese market. And it was shown in France, and it came in third place at an international Dome Festival in France, and also not long ago was in Romania at the Astra Film Festival in CBU.
Amazing. Congratulations.
So, is this a main focus of your business at the moment? The dome shows,
right now it's shifting, become more kind of a running part of my business. Like right now, I have sort of two projects in motion that are one that I'm sort of getting close to chasing after financing. The other one's in initial phase development. I have scripts for two other projects I've written previous. And so I sort of starting to build what you call a kind of a library of IPs.
That's really cool.
Actually, I just wanted to touch on kind of being based in Edmonton. Now, we've talked about that a little bit. You've talked about kind of the funding that you access, the Alberta Media Fund, a bit of some of the resources. But I wonder if you can touch on that a little bit more, kind of maybe explain to the audience from your experience what the biggest differences are and the challenges are. Because, when we talk about the industry, what oftentimes comes up is what's happening in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. But obviously, you're in an area that probably doesn't get enough attention, first of all, and probably because of the scale, could probably use a little more support, I would think.
Yeah, Edmonton's a little bit of a void, and the challenge is trying to find a rational reason why, and also have some sort of router funding that allow animators just to do animation. For me, I get my funding through the grant route or through script writing. And so Alberta has a fairly strong pre-development and script development fund. So it allows me to kind of get the initial footing and phases done, but there's actually no money for just doing animation. And so that makes it a little bit of a challenge kind of to bridge things out. And so you have to be a little bit more creative in your approach. There is a little bit of kind of a corporate industry here, not strong. And so that allows for some opportunities, but it's just a matter of persistence. So you just have to decide that you're going to do this and you're going to find a way to do it, no matter what. And you just have to stick to it because there's just no other, there's no necessarily any kind of visible ways out. We did just start up just recently, not long ago. There is a animation group, Edmonton Animation Group, that just started going, but it is still in its initial phases and is still trying to figure out, trying to get some grounding and trying to figure out how to put a process in place that they can properly take people up to a next level and also develop some sort of maintain support to help build the industry locally, kind of grow it.
Right.
And are you?
And is that? Oh,
sorry, John. Are you drawing from artists locally when you're crewing up for animators, or do you have to search elsewhere?
The thing about most grants in most provinces, it's all localized, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so for me, in order to actually get and benefit funding from the Alberta Media Fund, it has to come from kind of local talent.
Yeah.
How is that talent pool for you? Like, as you've brought in people to work on your projects, or maybe even what you see and hear from the schools, how do you think that talent level is currently?
Well, unlike other cities, we don't have kind of strong schools. I think we have this one school that has an 8-month program, and then Nate puts out some students. But where we do benefit, at least more recently, is that we're seeing an influx of animators starting to move back to Edmonton because of the markets abroad are dropping off. So
Right.
originally they started here, they travel out to Vancouver, spend 5-10 years in the industry there, and all of a sudden they're going, well, now it's time to come back home because there's no work left there.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a little bit of a growing pool that could potentially source and kind of grow on.
So it sounds like in terms of overall your industry there could definitely benefit from more development, and that can come from, as you say, like professionals moving back to the province, back to Edmonton. But maybe there's other ways, like more outreach programs, maybe more, co-production deals, maybe even more conversations like we're having today, right? Where, other professionals can share ideas, share production pipelines, how things work on a larger scale, smaller scale, because again, every point of view brings some value to it, right?
Yeah, Edmonton requires investment opportunities and the chance to actually give animators that opportunity to kind of immerse themselves in the process for an extended period of time.
Hmm.
And you have a lot of people who have some initial education from the
Right.
local programs, but unless they get a full-fledged experience on a project, a larger scale project, their skills only go to a certain point, and it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily allow the industry to expand quickly. But I find like this content I'm developing, what's unique about it, it does provide those people who come on board on that project the opportunity to kind of get a much wider vision of the whole approach and process. Because when I'm working on a kind of a more smaller scale, it means that everybody has to have on the project develops a more generalized approach to the process.
Sure. Yeah.
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 You get exposure to different techniques and different roles. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes that necessity, forces you into a corner where you have to learn other skills and develop other skills. And even sometimes just the knowledge and experience of the business side. I know that from my earlier years as I kind of grew into my career and I became a little more curious and worked with smaller studios, you actually are immersed in more of the business and more of the everyday, and you realize, oh, you need this to run a studio. You need to make money to keep the doors open. So how do you make money? It's not a simple case of, oh, money just grows off trees, right? Like, talking about the funding, the need for the funding, because, for a lot of people who may be new to the industry, animation is very costly. It's
Yes.
not something you can do with a simple tool or device and just have it done for you. And back in our day, obviously, when things were on paper and painted on cell and then shot on film, and if any mistake was made, you would have to completely redo that shoot, right?
Yeah.
It was a very, very, very costly process. And even on a larger scale with series work that I've been involved with, the overhead cost to have a studio with people in those chairs is quite high. So, being able to, land a contract like that for a studio, make sure that those costs are covered, but hopefully at the end of the day, have some kind of profit out of it to keep the doors open, when that project ends, because every project does end within a certain finite period.
Yeah, and I think that's also what's unique about Edmonton. It forces us to push towards developing original content as opposed to bring content in from abroad.
Right.
Because we don't really have that base here currently where where some American entity is going to come to Edmonton, all of a sudden decide to have a production done here and developed. We sort of have to find ways to kind of come up with our own ideas and push them forward. And part of that is in the script writing and also in the kind of the functional paperwork involved in going after the funding.
Right.
And so anyone who's sort of coming into it who thinks that it's all about just the creative, it's not just about the creative, it's the money side of it, and also figuring out how you're going to get a return out of this whole process, like how do you generate kind of sales on any kind of product, and also about thinking about how to apply your skills to content that's not just broadcast, because I know broadcast is kind of a decreasing realm and market that is also going through its own issues. And so in order to sort of, from my perspective, to grow the animation industry from a place like Edmonton, you have to find other markets, other routes for getting your content out. And for me, dome stuff, perfect. It works by me.
Amazing. And actually, that's a great segue, because one of the questions we had, which again, kind of touched on already, is networking. Like, how do you kind of network with other professionals? And obviously, from what you just said too, about, creating your own content in Edmonton and kind of having a unique space for Edmonton, but now you got to try to sell that to other markets, other regions. So obviously, it sounds like networking will be very important, especially to someone like yourself with your own studio.
Depending on which kind of circles you're moving in. Like, I've sort of shifted in at times into the what you call the exhibit side of things for a while as well, where it was more kind of museum, large scale interactive exhibit stuff, and have worked on projects that went into places like New York and Napa Valley out in the US. But usually those come through kind of connected opportunities and through relationships in the networking process.
Right.
And same with domes. I've gone to about 6 different immersive media conferences over the past years in Columbus, Colorado, Montreal, and last year I was in Jena, Germany. And it's in that process, in that approach of getting out there, not only to sort of consume content, to be aware of what's going on within that kind of market niche, but also connecting to people who are involved not only in the creation process, but also in distribution, because it's distribution channels that are key. And the distribution model is also always changing. There's there's becoming a shift from what we call a sole distributor to kind of multi-distributor approach to getting your product out there. And if you understand it and you kind of connect to the right people, you know where to go to get your product into the planetariums on a worldwide basis, because I think that's where growth is going to happen. It's not going to happen in Canada. It has to be international.
So actually, you touched on kind of the multi-distributor kind of evolution, I guess, if I can call it that. Is that due to a number of factors, let's say like where our industry is kind of at right now? Is that kind of sharing costs, sharing resources for marketing, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, a lot of it is because distributors are kind of a little bit isolated or contained. Like, you'll have a distributor in the U.S., there's one in Montreal, and then the Asian market, there are separate distributors for different regions in Asia as well. And so by having a little more diversity in how kind of approach different markets, it ensures that your content can get to a wider audience. Because at the end of the day, it's about how many dome shows you can or how many licenses you can sell that determines the value of your product and how you technically can invest.
Yeah. And actually, just to wrap up kind of the networking thing, you're talking about these conferences, and I know that there are some funds available to producers for travel, right? Like to actually promote your products and your projects. Are you able to access any of those? Have you accessed those?
Yeah, Well, more recently, Edmonton's Green has provided an initial kind of phase funding that covers 75% of travel. And
Right.
that makes a huge difference because it allows me to kind of move about a little more kind of regularly. Before I had to fund a lot of these things myself,
Hmm.
but in most cases, the costs were manageable within the kind of scope of the project. Um, but as far as kind of alternate sources, that's something I've never there. I believe there are other funding available through other government branches, but because it's such a kind of a unique medium, um, a lot of these other funds tend to cater to technology or other practices, not necessarily to me.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 That makes sense. I've seen that before too. Actually, we're coming close to time, but I wanted to get one other question in for you. What is your hope for the current and future industry in your region in Edmonton? Do you have any pie in the sky dreams, ideas? Is there something you really, is burning inside your heart you really want to kind of see happen?
Well, I like anybody in your region, you'd like to see it grow. But for me, it's always a
Mhm.
personalized ideal. I see this idea of like I have this kind of graded plan to grow my productions and
Right.
eventually put in place ongoing stream of animators that I can keep rolling full time on a regular basis. That's why I like the idea of having these portfolio of IPs of projects that are already scripted and ready to go. That
Hmm.
means that I have a list that all of a sudden I can build in and kind of get rolling. And I think that's key because it's all about kind of allowing talent to develop their skills and get to a point where they can master specific disciplines. And for me, it's mostly in the dome world.
Amazing. Wow. Kathy, did you have anything else you wanted to ask Perry while we're
I guess I'm curious if you partner with the schools locally at all when you're looking for
Oh, that's a
talent.
good question.
I worked with Nate to some extent and have hired people or brought people in out of the program. Some of the people that were initially on my project came out of Nate. But then others had kind of fundamental support before that. One of the people's actually went to film school in Vancouver before they came to Nate.
Mm,
And so, I have been in discussions in times past, but their kind of mandate is always changing. And more
mm,
recently, they kind of bridge more towards game development than
Mm,
animation because of the not so kind of widely available animation industry here. And
right.
I do attend some of these kind of smaller functions with this other smaller school here that we have locally, but their talent is not developed to a point where I could say that I can easily just bring them into a project and think that they're going to be able to run with it.
yeah, you have to invest in them to get them up to speed.
Yeah, it's something,
Yeah.
and it's something when you're working in a kind of small market like I am, you don't want to spend 2 years investing in somebody to get them up and running. You have to ensure that the people have enough supplemental skills that they can get up and kind of turn the project over effectively and efficiently. And we do have those people here because now they're all coming in from other regions, and so I have kind of a ongoing communications with those people that I intend to plan in on my projects, and so I sort of work with them to ensure that they're prepped and ready to go.
Gotcha.
Nice. I think that's always going to be the case. Like, it doesn't matter what school someone is from,
Hmm.
there's always some kind of ramp up time to the real world because what they're taught and what they experience in school is kind of like it's a bit of its own bubble. It's a bit of its own sphere within its own context of that space and that timeline. So I know, like, coming from Sheridan and then getting my first job, it was like day and night, to be honest. It's like, okay, we were taught all these things, but now that I'm in a studio and this is the expectation, this is the pace, this is the kind of the quality level. Oh, it's a completely different style. I was never taught to draw, at
Yeah.
school, basically. There's all these things that obviously a new student or at least a graduating student will still have to kind of get acclimatized to.
Yeah, in school too, you're also taught a generalized look at
Yeah.
each role rather than specializing, which is what people do when they're working more. most of the time.
Yeah, I think that's where internships, can really be helpful. Obviously, not every student can be placed that way,
Mhm.
but Perry, it sounds like what you're doing to help at the very least is amazing
Yeah, the
to
one
your
thing
to your
that
city.
I guess the one thing that they just recently introduced in the past year with the Alberta Media Fund, and part of this we call Made in Alberta Fund, which is what I'm chasing, is that they included a percentage for mentorship. And so that
Mhm.
provides us
Hmm.
kind of a foundational fund where you can bring people in and kind of manage your costs, and allow someone to come in and further expand their experience as a developer and producer. And so
Right.
Oh,
the
that's
intent,
great.
rather than just me trying to kind of fill that out, I could sort of bring somebody in and give them enough understanding and experience to kind of take over and hopefully become future developers of dome shows.
Wow, amazing.
That's cool. Yeah.
Where was all this when I was a student? Actually, we're just coming up on to time now. So we usually ask our guests a question, kind of a little bit of a random question, kind of at the end. But one we do like to ask of our guests is, was there a particular time or a particular event that you're very proud of that maybe changed you or was a challenge in your life, maybe just during your career? Could be unrelated too, but is there something that you've been through that you know you perhaps faced an obstacle that you managed around and over and are very proud of, something you can share with the audience?
I think a lot of it is about, but see, the thing is, I come from kind of visual side, so, but I've always had this kind of knack for writing. And
Mhm.
so some of the initial content I started writing, a lot of it is about pushing yourself through to bring something to completion. So I started developing this one concept or idea called state of mind. And it was geared more towards actual animation production. And so more or less initially I just sort of put my time in, but I worked it towards to a point where I actually finished the script. And
Wow.
that was like a realization that, hey, I can do this.
Yeah.
But then, it gets to a point, for example, like Legends, is I've worked my way through that process and put it out a product. But what I begin to realize is the thing about dome shows, they run in your community. They're there for a long time. They get far more screen time than average production. Like Legends been running at the Telus World of Science for like 5 years now. But when you
Mm.
go into community and you start connecting with people, and people's, oh, I saw your show. It was really great, really. And
Yeah.
when you get that kind of glowing, positive kind of reply from people in the community, you begin to realize, geez, I did something and somebody actually got something out of it. It had
Yeah.
value to them. And that's
Right.
what sort of brings it home where you go, geez, it's sort of like the motivation that continues to drive your purpose. If you
Hmm.
put something out and somebody gets something of it of value that affects their lives, that's when it gives your product more meaning.
Yeah,
It's
I love
amazing.
that. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great when you have, even as you say, even that one person says how it's affected them. It's such an inspiration to take from. And I've had that happen a few times myself, and sometimes in other areas of my life. I'm sure we've all, hopefully, all experienced that at least once in our lives. But it is something that, if for the first time you've just experienced that, um, it's so profound. You don't understand how it feels until it happens, right?
Yeah,
Like,
especially in a visual medium where a lot of the work is done away from people without any kind of direct contact with an audience.
Mhm.
So it's pretty refreshing when you see, oh, it had an impact outside of just my little world.
yeah, and I think that's where people get excited. Obviously, for anyone that works on TV productions or feature films or, streaming now, obviously, as well. The first time you get to see your name in the credits list and you tell your parents, oh my God, I worked on this show. And your parents see your name in those credits and everyone's proud of you because you've done something that is now reaching out to an audience, whether that audience is, again, it doesn't matter whether the audience is within a country, globally, maybe it's across a few cities, depending on the broadcast as well, right? But I think that's, yeah, definitely something to be very proud of. And Perry, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing to hear you talk about, what you do. The dome animation's still so fascinating to me. Something I would like to try my hand at some point, something a little bit different than our typical productions here. But it just seems like, to me, and actually what you said just recently, the fact that, their playtime is actually longer than a lot of productions, right? Having, this under your belt and storytelling through these dome animations, and again, having it affect not just a local audience, but now you're getting visitors from around the world who visit, let's say, the Science Center and go into these domes to watch these animations. I think it's quite incredible.
Yeah, it's not just that. It's that we take kind of something like what we call a crafted Alberta story, and then it starts to find its way around the world. Like right now, Legends just sold a 5-year license to the Ecotarium in Massachusetts. And that's a huge stretch. And that means that show is going to be running in a facility in some far location for 5 years. And so there's kind of the exposure and also the kind of idea that Alberta is kind of bringing stories out to the world, and it's getting there. There's sort of some progress, which is kind of neat.
Amazing. Well, we are done for time. So again, Perry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure. We really thank you for offering your experience and all your backgrounds and explaining your dome animations and everything. Has been a treat for us, and hopefully it's been a treat for our audience as well.
Thank you.
All right. So to the audience, thank you for joining today. We will see you on the next podcast. The ACC podcast is created and hosted by Kathy McDonald and John Lee. Music by Mike Romaniak, mixing and editing by Kathy McDonald, and produced by Kyrene Kim.